From the perspective of doing a cross-sector response to a crisis, the bushfires in January helped get those conversations and those structures working well so that now that we have a new crisis, those networks and those relationships and those connections that you need are already built, and we were already talking to each other a lot.
Today on Law Next, we'll venture to Australia to speak with Kate Fazio, Head of Innovation and Engagement at Justice Connect, the legal services charitable organization devoted to helping close the justice gap by connecting people and community groups with the help they need. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment. But first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. I also want to remind our regular listeners that if you like Law Next, you can help support the show by visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/lawnext and pledging a small amount of support. A big shout out to our top-level Patreon supporter, John Grant, founder of Agile Attorney Consulting, agileattorney.com. Well, Kate Fazio, welcome to Law Next.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for doing this. It's a little bit of a logistical issue, I guess, scheduling a podcast with somebody in Australia, given it's about 11 o'clock your time. It's 8 o'clock at night our time. Our producer's on the West Coast, so 5 o'clock his time. So I'm glad we were able to make this work for everybody. And before we kind of get into things, I just want to ask, how are you and your loved ones doing during this crisis?
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, we're doing okay. Australia is a little bit behind the US in terms of our journey through the pandemic. We have entered into, in my state, a period of significant lockdown. So most people are working from home and only leaving the house for essential reasons. That means that my husband and I and our rescue, Jack Russell, are sharing a very small study together all day long. But so far we're surviving and we still like each other. So that's good.
It's early yet.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, we're a week or so behind where you're up to in the US. But in terms of the impact more broadly on the Australian community, there's been a huge impact on employment, as there has been in the US, and a lot of pressure on our health system already. So as an organisation that works with people who are already vulnerable, our clients are already seeing the effects on their lives and their livelihoods, and we're really noticing increasing demand for legal help alongside increasing demand for all kinds of help.
I mean, there's an expression out of the frying pan into the fire, but in your case, it's kind of out of the fire into the frying pan. I mean, Australia has just come out of the whole bushfire crisis, and you're probably still really recovering from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in the state where I'm based, Victoria, and the other state where Justice Connect has a large service footprint, New South Wales, they were the two most significantly affected territories in Australia. Personally, I feel like I haven't had a chance to catch my breath this year. We came back from our Christmas break period in very early January, which is just when the bushfires were really escalating in Australia, and we pulled together a rapid service response in that context, and that has been running ever since. And in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've been doing it all over again to try to help people affected by corona. So it is absolutely a big, exhausting year so far, and it's only 2nd of April. But I think it just highlights for so many people that they have existing vulnerabilities, and you layer factors on top of that and their personal crisis just escalates. And in Australia, that's for many people the effects of the bushfire plus the effects of measures to control corona.
Well, I actually read something you wrote. I want to talk a lot more about what Justice Connect is and what it does, but something that I read that you wrote suggested that one I don't know if you want to call it a bright side to the bushfire, but that kind of already had you in crisis mode. I mean, that already had you some of the wheels in place that you are helping you to respond to the current situation.
Yeah, you're right, Bob. It's been an interesting experience for us with two crises following one after the other. And what I wrote about is that given that we had to really rapidly prepare a legal response to the bushfire crises in Australia, in Victoria and New South Wales in particular, what that meant is that Justice Connect was already in active conversations and partnerships and collaborative working arrangements with a lot of different types of organisations across the legal and social services sector. And so because we had those relationships and we'd started to put infrastructure in place to support this collaborative working, it meant that when COVID has hit us, we do have somewhat of a better starting position in working out what a crisis response needs to look like. The actual crises are quite different to each other. With the bushfire crises, there is a lack of connectivity into quite a lot of the affected regions because the infrastructure has been destroyed by the fires. And so there's a real need for on-the-ground presence of lawyers. And that means those fires occurred in quite remote areas. And so it means there's been a lot of investment in getting boots on the ground out to those affected regions and then building networks and infrastructure to support sending those people to avenues for free legal assistance, which might be city-based, but with appropriate connections put in place. With Corona, it's different because most people are now self-isolating and they are looking for ways to get legal help in an online setting or at least by phone. Unfortunately, what this does mean, though, is for those people who were affected by the bushfires and are now affected by the COVID measures, they are particularly disadvantaged. There's layered crisis affecting them, and it makes it even harder to get legal assistance to them.
So with the bushfires, there was a demand for in-person, in face-to-face help, and with the COVID crisis, it's just the opposite. That's the last thing anybody wants or needs, I guess, right now.
Exactly. And unfortunately for the bushfire affected regions, they still have connectivity issues. So they're really struggling at the moment.
So Kate, what is Justice Connect? What is the mission? What does it do?
So Justice Connect is a charity and we work across Australia, but we have headquarters in our two most populous states, Victoria and New South Wales. We were set up originally over 28 years ago as essentially a clearinghouse. I'm not sure how much that terminology is used in the US, but a clearinghouse is an organisation that takes requests for legal assistance, processes them through a triage process and allocates those people or organisations to pro bono. So it was law firms that helped set us up 28 years ago. In that 28 years, we've become much more than a clearinghouse, and we run a whole range of programs and services that use both in-house lawyers and draw on pro bono resources. So we have a staff of over 80 due to the volume of casework that we do as an organisation, as well as through our pro bono network. We're really well placed to spot trends and issues in legal need. And we draw on those trends and that data and our insights to advocate for particular types of legal services or better government funding. And we also use that data to inform our law reform and system advocacy work. So we're often arguing for better laws that are fairer for Australians or that address particular issues that we're seeing recurring in the community.
Here in the United States, we often talk about the access to justice crisis, a figure we commonly use is that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of those with legal needs who aren't getting served by the justice system or by the legal system. What is setting apart the COVID crisis, the bushfire crisis? I mean, what's the scope of the access to justice problem in Australia?
So the scope of the problem in Australia is very similar to the US experience. I regularly attend access to justice conferences in the US, and I'm amazed by how similar the issues really are across the two jurisdictions. There are obviously some regional variations, but the fundamental issue is largely the same. And that issue is that a lot of people have legal problems in their day-to-day lives, and for a significant proportion of them, they can't afford a private lawyer and they're not eligible for government-funded free legal assistance. So there's this enormous gap, which we call the justice gap. And in Australia, we know that there's around 4 million people each year that fall into that justice gap. We have a population of about 25 million. So that's a really significant proportion of our population is finding themselves in that gap on an annual basis.
Given the COVID crisis, the corona crisis, as this has come along, I know that you touched on sort of the way people are needing to access legal services, but what are the kinds of problems that you're seeing exacerbated by this crisis? What are the legal issues that this is raising for people in Australia?
So we've done a lot of analysis over the last 3 weeks to make sure that we're understanding what that looks like. And the areas of highest legal need are pretty much what you would expect. So we're getting a lot of inquiries and a lot of web traffic around employment law problems. So a lot of people are being terminated or stood down or denied shifts as businesses are closing. Another area of very significant need, and again, also some high website traffic, is around people having concerns about their tenancy, their ability to continue paying rent, and their risk of becoming homeless in this time. We've also had quite a lot of inquiries and traffic around bankruptcy issues as well. We have a fact sheet on our website which is about how does bankruptcy affect my family, and quite heartbreakingly, that's one of our most accessed resources over the last couple of weeks. So I think that really brings to life an expression of that stress that the population is feeling, that they're online worried about becoming bankrupt and looking for resources about what impact that's going to have on their family. So I was really sad to see that was being accessed so heavily over the last few weeks.
I think that's very much the case here in the United States as well. So you're the head of innovation and engagement at Justice Connect. So what does that mean? What is your particular responsibilities?
So I've been working at Justice Connect for nearly 8 years now, which feels like it's gone incredibly quickly. I started my career as a corporate lawyer, and I moved to Justice Connect 8 years ago to take ownership of a piece of work that was really focused on our program that helps charities and not-for-profits. And my job was to extend the online presence of that service to create online resources. They already had quite a few resources, but to really build them out, to build some new infrastructure and approaches for how we would get those resources out to the sector. And so I did that role for nearly 4 years. And in that time, I started to think and explore a lot around questions of how are we using online in legal service delivery, how are we using online approaches to deliver assistance at scale. If we think about this justice gap, what more could we be doing? We know that we can't give every person who needs help a one-on-one experience with a lawyer. With the scale of the problem, that's just impossible. So what are the other ways that we can be helping? How can we put our time to work so that we're assisting as many people and community groups as possible? So out of my pursuit of that question, we tried lots of things in that team. We built interactive applications, we built document generators, we created online learning opportunities and animated videos. And it was because of that work that I was doing that I started coming to the LSC TIG conference in the US. And that was incredibly
where
valuable.
you and I met a couple of years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We met, I think, the second time that I'd
New
attended
Orleans,
that conference. Yeah, and I remember you gave a keynote presentation at that conference about the point I've just made, which is, given the scale of this problem, we can't keep trying to solve it in the same old ways because we'll never reach everyone. It's just impossible. So we have to start thinking of different approaches. And when you gave that presentation, that resonated very strongly with me. It's certainly the type of conversations that we'd been having at Justice Connect. And so once I'd been going to the TIG conference and doing more research internationally, we put together a business case at Justice Connect that we needed to make a hard pivot into the online space, not just with that program that works with charities and not-for-profits, but across all of our programs and all of our areas of work. And that's when my current role was created. We were lucky enough to get some funding from Google through the Google Impact Challenge, which really kick-started this broader stream of work. And I've now been doing that work for a bit over 4 years.
So I'm going to guess that the demand has gone up even higher. I mean, you mentioned that your website traffic is up in response to this coronavirus crisis, and I'm guessing that the demand for services is up during this crisis. Not just different types of needs, but more people needing help right now. So how does Justice Connect respond to that? What kinds of tools do you have available to you to help address some of this demand for help that's coming in?
Yeah, so we've seen demand in quite a few areas of our work double over the last few weeks. And interestingly, when I look at our web data, the increase is more coming from females than males. There are some people in the sector suggesting that could reflect the vulnerability of women in an isolation situation, that they're more likely to experience abuse from their family or partner. I can't answer whether that's what's driving that trend. We'll get more insight into it as we take on more cases. But yeah, there's
certainly
definitely
seeing reports
an increase.
Documenting that here, that already those who are in danger of domestic abuse are in more likely to have been victims of it during this crisis than before.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of what we're doing, we're seeing huge increased demand from charities and not-for-profits as well. So it's across the board, across all of our services. And a couple of weeks ago, we decided as a leadership team that we were going to really put our energy into answering that question of how do we scale up our services? How do we meet this increasing demand? So we've got a few strategies that we've put into place. Because we have already done a huge program of digital transformation at Justice Connect, all of our services can run in a remote setting. We can take applications for assistance online at any point in time. And we have an intake tool that helps people who are engaging with us online get a sense of whether they're going to be eligible for our services before they go ahead and make a full application. So we're trying to streamline that process and make it as quick as possible for people when they are applying in that online context. Our phone lines are still open as well, and we're manning those phone lines in teams, in intake and triage teams remotely. We have also published a range of resources on these issues that we're seeing high volume of inquiries come through about. So we have new resources on government's exercise of emergency powers. We have resources on tenancy, and we have resources on court closures and the impact that has on matters that are already on foot or claims that people might be seeking to make or defend. We also have our pro bono portal, which is playing a key role in our response, as it has done in our bushfire response as well. So our pro bono portal has been developed by Justice Connect in-house over the last few years. It's one of the products that we developed out of that concerted effort to think about how we were working online. So Justice Connect works with 51 member firms. They're the firms that take pro bono referrals from us, and we use the pro bono portal to do that really efficiently and effectively. And our firms co-designed that portal with us. Now, since the bushfires, so we were working with 51 firms. Since the bushfires, we now have 167 firms in the pro bono portal. So it is an extraordinary way for us to reach pro bono capacity. By using that tool, we can post matters, and those matters can find their way to the most appropriate firms in a really efficient ecosystem. And we're seeing that when we post matters with the pro bono portal, they're being picked up often within 24 hours, which is quite extraordinary.
So does one feed into another insofar as if somebody comes to your site and goes into begins the online intake process, if they, I assume that pre-qualifies them in some way and helps determine what kind of problem they have, and does that then feed into the pro bono portal, or what happens when somebody comes to your site and goes through that intake process? How does it work?
Yeah, so there's a few more steps in the middle, because Justice Connect runs a whole range of programs and services, and we're not only a clearinghouse. The first thing that our intake and triage team does is they review the information that they've received, which they've received in a structured data format through our online intake tool. And what they'll be doing is much like a hospital intake and triage. They'll be looking at what's the nature of the problem, what's the assistance that the person needs, what services are available, whether that's at Justice Connect or beyond Justice Connect. And then once they've determined the services that are available, they'll send that person to the most appropriate service channel. So sometimes that will be to get legal advice or assistance from one of our in-house lawyers, and sometimes that will be to send that person through the pro bono portal to our pro bono network. So we shape up the matters that get put onto the portal. We draft them and we articulate it in a way that we know that firms will appreciate, that's giving them the information they need to make their decisions. So it's a bit of a funnel in terms of the number and volume that comes through our intake channels is then reduced down to a certain class of matter that is appropriate for brokering to pro bono using our pro bono portal.
What's the scope of this? I mean, how many people does Justice Connect serve in a year, or how many people are using your online portal, your resources? How many lawyers are involved?
Yeah, they're all good questions. So last year we
a whole
received
bunch of questions there, but yeah,
yeah, there's a bunch of questions. So last year we received 24,000 requests for assistance. And that was compared to 8,000 the year prior. And the key distinction there is in the year prior, we hadn't yet launched our online intake channel. So once we made the volume of requests became dramatically higher. However, in terms of that additional volume, a significant number of those inquiries were provided with instant online feedback around their eligibility. So they never engaged with us in a one-to-one way. They received feedback through our intake application. And in many cases, that feedback includes a recommendation of an alternative service that might be able to assist. So then the next level of people are those that actually spend some time with a Justice Connect team, either doing some further intake or receiving legal advice and assistance. And in that category, that's closer to that 8,000 range. And then we help around 2,000 people a year with in a lawyer-client relationship. In terms of our web resources, we get around 500,000 hits to our website each year. That's across the website with resources for individuals as well as a separate resource we run for community organisations.
And then you've just launched, if I have this right, a service called Justice Connect Answers that lets people get quick answers to simple legal questions. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So we're very excited about this. So I gave you that breakdown previously, and there's a big drop off between the number of people that get light assistance from us and the number of people that we help in the lawyer-client relationship. So what Justice Connect Answers is aiming to do is to provide an intermediate service level between those two levels so that we can give people short, discreet legal advice in an online setting. And we're hoping that we'll be able to therefore provide a lot more of those people that are coming through and speaking to us out of that group of 8,000 some actual legal advice rather than just legal information. And so the way we're using that platform is we have our pro bono lawyers working on that platform as well as taking on our full pro bono referrals. So it's essentially an online legal clinic.
So how do they connect? Is it all by email or through an online interface of some sort, or how do they get their answer from the lawyer?
So it's a full platform. We are using, I'm not sure if you've heard of Free Legal Answers in the US. It's a technology platform that a law firm, Baker Donaldson, set up, and they've made that tech platform, which runs on Orchard CMS, available at no cost to many organisations around the US. And so we reached out to Baker Donaldson and asked if they would consider making that platform available to us in Australia. And they were very happy to do that. And we've been working on customising and adapting that platform so that it works in the Australian setting over the last 9 months. And we've just launched it publicly in the last 2 weeks, and it couldn't be a better time for us to be
right.
launching a service like this. As I mentioned earlier, lots of people are perhaps for the first time looking for legal help right now, and they're doing it in an online setting. So we have this unprecedented demand for legal help coupled with this desire to be in an online setting, which means that this platform is really perfectly suited to responding to the increased needs of people affected by COVID-19 measures.
And the pro bono portal that you talked about, which is your system for distributing these matters out to the law firms that you work with, you're taking that beyond Australia, right? You're developing an international version of that?
Yeah, we are. So we launched the Pro Bono portal halfway through last year, and that was after we had done a pilot period with 14 large firms, many of them international, throughout the beginning of last year. So once we launched it, we started receiving this huge volume of requests to use the platform from all around the world. Partly that was requests coming from clearinghouses, so our peer organisations in other jurisdictions, but also because a lot of the firms in Australia are international firms, they were driving quite a lot of that interest as well. So given that we now have over 160 firms, including almost all of the large law firms in Australia, using the platform and finding it to be helpful, that's driving forward this global project. We have been working with the international organisation PILNet, which does a lot of work with both law firms that run pro bono practices and clearinghouses. And PILNet has been helping us to scope out what an international application of the portal might look like and who would need to be involved in that work. And we've made really significant progress on that, and we've identified a range of pilot jurisdictions where we have in place all the organisations that will be involved in the pilot, so the clearinghouses and the law firms in that region. And we are right now just in the final stages of planning what that rollout exactly will look like, and also making sure that we have the right funding and resourcing in place to support doing this really well.
And will that be mostly, what regions will that be in? Where are you going? What geographic areas will be doing that?
Yeah, so we've built up a whole range of potential regions where we could pilot the platform beyond Australia. Some of the really obvious ones are UK and Ireland. We've confirmed with our stakeholders there that given the legal system is so similar to the Australian legal system, and so many of the firms are the same firms that are working in Australia, the view of our stakeholders there is that they would need to make very light adaptations to the platform for it to be able to be used. So it's almost ready off the shelf for them. And then there are some regions that we've been doing analysis on that are significantly more complicated. So Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, where pro bono culture is in an earlier stage of emergence. But there's also incredible opportunity there for those pro bono ecosystems to leapfrog their international peers. So pro bono in the US, Australia and UK has been thriving for some time, but there's definitely been a lack of a coordinated approach, a lack of a data-driven approach, a lack of visibility across multiple players and platforms for us to truly understand what that ecosystem is looking like. These more emergent jurisdictions have the opportunity to set their ecosystem up with infrastructure that is far more supportive and intelligent, and that will help them, I think, move more quickly through the stages of pro bono ecosystem development than some of the earlier jurisdictions did.
Is this? Are you familiar with the product Paladin in the United States? That sounds like it sort of does something similar in the sense of it works as a sort of a distribution system for pro bono opportunities to law firms, and helps law firms manage their kind of internal pro bono work.
I think there's some areas of overlap. I certainly don't want to speak to Paladin's product. I would let them describe its features and the way that
They've been on the show.
Works.
They've been on my show before.
But my reflections on the areas of difference, there's a few. So the impetus for our product at Justice Connect and the reason why we decided to develop it is we had huge amounts of demand for legal help on one side and huge amounts of demand in our pro bono network of 51 firms to do more pro bono. And the barrier that we had was efficiently connecting up that demand for help and that demand to provide help. So the platform sits in the middle with stewardship and oversight by Justice Connect to help get that two-sided marketplace flowing really well. Once we had that going, we've then started to have conversations with firms about what their internal pro bono practice looks like and the tools that they're using internally to place the matters out. I think that is the area where Paladin certainly started out being interested in, more on the firm side, whereas the place where Justice Connect has started from is this question about how do we connect up the people that need help with this huge network of pro bono that we already have access to, but that we just want to work smarter with. And so I think over time, our product is, we're building new features out all the time that do answer that question around what happens on the firm side more. But certainly the feedback from firms has been their priority is to firstly improve the way that matters are getting sent to them and the way that they can match up their capacity with need. And then a secondary issue is what practices are they using internally at their firm to distribute matters out to their lawyers.
We'll get back to my interview in just a moment, but first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, let's continue this week's interview. As head of innovation, what's still on your wish list, your development list, your roadmap? What are you looking forward to still being able to do that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Probably a big question, right?
It is a big question. So we have, I guess to put a bit more color around how we work, we have an absolutely amazing in-house innovation team. So we've got a group of developers, project leads, coordinators, and they're working across our various existing products. So that's our intake tool, our sector referral tool, our pro bono portal, but they're also doing a lot of research and development work as well. So one new project that we've just started, which is really exciting to me, is we're working with the University of Melbourne's Computing Science Department to build a natural language processor that we can add into our intake tool to improve the experience of using that tool. So this is quite a similar project to the work that's happening in the US that Suffolk and David Colarusso are working on. So we're in close contact with them. We're very much interested in addressing similar issues. And so they've been really fantastic in sharing their thinking and approach with us so far. What we have at Justice Connect that is quite remarkable is because our intake system has now been running for over a year, we have thousands and thousands of data points that include the language that people have used to describe their problem, as well as all the tagging up that our system has done, categorizing that, which has then been checked by a lawyer. So we've got this fantastic, rich data set that we can use to train a natural language processor to spot what the legal category is that applies, or range of legal categories that apply to the natural language text of an everyday Australian. We certainly know that one of the biggest barriers in Australia, and I think it's pretty similar in the US, one of the biggest barriers to accessing help is to recognize that you have a legal problem first. And then once that recognition has occurred, to then work out what is the actual problem, what are the words that person needs to use to connect with the right help. It's really important in a Google search context. It's also really important just in an old school approach to trying to find help. If you're ringing around and you don't actually have the right words to describe what your problem is and what the help is that you need, there's often a real disconnect and a failure of our system to spot that problem and connect them up with the best resource.
Right, and the sounds like the project you're working on is similar to David's, and Margaret Hagan, of course, is working on that as well, and in being able to better train software systems to understand the language that people use in common parlance to talk about their legal problems. They don't talk like lawyers do, thank God, I guess. But it's great that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank God they don't speak like lawyers, but my reflection would be that a lot of lawyers don't appreciate that. They don't understand the disconnect. I see people publishing online resources, which are wonderful resources full of rich, high-value information, but they're so filled with jargon that it's very unlikely the person that actually needs that resource is going to find it unless it's handed to them.
Yeah. You were a lawyer yourself. How did you get into working in this space?
So I started out my career as a corporate lawyer. I also studied journalism, and my interest in journalism was always around thinking about how I could make a contribution to improving public discourse, to building a better society. I know you're a journalist and a lawyer, so I did a double undergraduate degree of journalism and law. And when I graduated in 2009, there were not a lot of jobs for journalists. So I became a lawyer.
Yep.
And I spent 3 years as a corporate lawyer at one of the really big leading law firms in Australia, King & Wood Mallesons. It was a great experience. It's certainly been very valuable for me to have had that experience in the work that I now do with firms, because it gives me a deep understanding of their experience of pro bono and the systems and approaches that they're using. But after 3 years, I decided I wanted to move to an organisation that was a bit more focused on public benefit work. And Justice Connect did a lot of work with the firm I was working at already. So that move made a lot of sense to me. But because of my journalistic background, I was in a role that was really not focused on providing one-to-one advice at all. It was focused on this question of what else can we be doing to provide assistance at scale, effective assistance at scale. And that's really where my interest in technology started. I did a master's degree in social impact and social investment. And I think that degree as well really helped me to keep coming back to this question of impact and scale. And I think in almost any consideration of impact and scale, technology in this day and age is part of the answer. It's a tool. It's a tool in the toolkit, but it's a really powerful tool. And I've found the more that I invest in understanding technology, the more impact I can have in my work.
You are preaching to the choir with those words. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with me today, and kudos to you and everybody at Justice Connect for the very important and innovative work that you're doing to serve, help close the access to justice gap in Australia. Good for you. Thanks for being with us today.
I really should say, and thank you for having me. And I should say, I really want to emphasize how much the work that has happened in the United States in the last 10 years has been so leading and invaluable for a jurisdiction like Justice Connect. We've learnt so much from what everyone in the US has been doing, and there's been a real generosity of spirit as well. A sense of sharing. And almost every project that we're working on in this space, we've had interactions with United States-based organizations in one way or another. So the impact of the work in the US is rippling out, and we've really benefited from the early moves that were made in the US. And we just hope that we can start to contribute back some of our learning into those conversations, which, have just been so generous.
Well, I think what goes around comes around. I'm sure people in the United States are going to learn a lot from what you're doing, and I hope some of them listen to this interview and get inspired to do more in terms of using technology to address these issues. Thank you very much, Kate. I hope you and your family and coworkers all stay safe during this crazy time and are well.
Thank you, Bob.
Well, big thanks to Kate Fazio, Head of Innovation and Engagement at Justice Connect, for being with us today. And thanks also to the sponsor who made today's show possible, MyCase, with thousands of customers as a trusted practice management solution, helping lawyers across the country run organized, efficient, and successful law firms. Try MyCase for free today at mycase.com. As always, thanks to Ben Ambrogi for producing and editing the show. That's it for this week. This is Bob Ambrogi.